My name is Claire, and if you'd asked me that night, I would have said my life was normal, even happy. But the truth is, everything I thought I had was already slipping through my fingers. It started at my mother-in-law's birthday dinner. White linen crystal glasses, the kind of evening where everyone smiles too wide. Her friends wore diamonds the size of small planets. I'd spent the day cooking, arranging flowers, making sure her favorite Chardonnay was chilled just right. I wanted her to like me. I always wanted that. When I walked in, she looked me over like I was an unpaid intern. "Oh, Claire," she said, "you actually made it. How lovely." I smiled. I always smiled. That was my armor. Dinner went on, endless toasts, fake laughter. Then out of nowhere, she lifted her glass and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some women marry for love. Others marry up." Everyone chuckled. My husband laughed the hardest. I stared at the silver fork in my hand, wondering if she could see the reflection of how much I hated her in it. But I said nothing. Then she leaned forward, eyes sharp as her diamonds. "You were never part of this family, dear," she said. "We don't marry gold diggers." The table erupted in laughter. It was the kind that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. I remember the way my husband looked at me, not with defense, not with guilt, but with quiet agreement. That was the moment something inside me shut off. I smiled. I don't know why. Maybe because rage and clarity feel the same when they first arrive. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and stared into the mirror for what felt like hours. My makeup was perfect. My heart wasn't. When I returned to the table, I could still hear them laughing about me, something about how she tries too hard. So I sat down, calm, careful, quiet, and I said the line that would end that laughter forever. I slid a small envelope across the table. "You might want to open that," I said. She looked puzzled, then annoyed. "What is this?" "It's the deed," I said softly. "The house you're living in, your son sold it. The buyer is me." The words fell heavy like glass breaking in slow motion. Her smile froze. My husband turned ghost white. The entire room went silent, the kind of silence that eats sound itself. I could hear the air conditioner hum. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. She tore open the envelope, the official stamp, the signatures, the notary mark. Real, legal, final. For a second I saw her face change, the confusion, then disbelief, then horror. It was the first time I'd ever seen her speechless. Everyone just stared. And in that silence, I realized something: revenge doesn't need fire. It only needs truth delivered cold. I stood up slowly, smoothed my dress, and said, "You should enjoy dinner. It's still your last one here." Then I walked out. No one followed me, not even him. Driving home that night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just watched the city lights blur through the windshield, and I felt something shift, not in them, but in me. People think revenge is a scream, but it's not. It's a whisper that finally sounds like peace. That was the night everything ended, and the night everything began. The morning after that dinner, the house was so quiet it felt staged. My husband didn't say a word. He just picked up his briefcase, adjusted his tie, and left without coffee, something he'd never done in 10 years of marriage. I sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold. It wasn't sadness I felt. It was awareness. The kind that makes you see every moment of the past differently. Every insult, every smile that wasn't a smile, every dinner that was really an evaluation. For 7 years, I'd played the perfect daughter-in-law. The polite nods, the "thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," the gifts on Mother's Day, the tolerance for her comments about my humble upbringing. I used to think patience could win people over. Now I knew patience just teaches bullies how far they can go. When I first married into the Whitmore family, I was a high school English teacher. I loved books, quiet mornings, students who still believed in second chances. My husband Richard was a financial analyst, the golden son, as his mother liked to remind him. We bought a small house or so, I thought. Later I learned his mother's trust had paid for most of it. She'd insisted the deed go under his name for simplicity. I never questioned it. Love made me soft, but over time the kindness I tried to build became ammunition for their cruelty. She'd say things like, "Claire doesn't understand money," She understands feelings. Or maybe you should volunteer instead of working, dear. It suits your nature. Richard never corrected her. He'd just pat my hand at dinner and say, "She means well." One afternoon I overheard them in the study. "She's comfortable, Mom. That's what matters." "No, dear." His mother replied, "She's dependent. That's what matters." It was like discovering a splinter you'd been living with for years, invisible but poisonous. After that, I started paying attention. Every bill that came in, every statement that listed only his name, every signature that wasn't mine. I realized I didn't own a single thing in the life I'd built. Not the house, not the car, not even the joint savings account that just happened to require his approval for withdrawals. I didn't confront him. Confrontation never worked with Richard. He had a way of turning everything into your fault. Instead, I called an old friend, Tom, a retired lawyer who used to work with my father. "Claire," he said after I explained everything, "if you want to survive this, you'll have to start thinking like them." That sentence stayed with me. So I started. I opened a new bank account under my maiden name. Quietly. I began taking on freelance tutoring online cash, small but steady. I filed taxes separately that year. No one noticed. Then I began researching real estate. I learned that the Whitmore's house, the big one with the white columns and the iron gate, wasn't fully paid off. It was tied to a private loan one that could legally be sold if the note holder chose to. Tom helped me understand the paperwork. "You're saying I asked if I buy that debt, they'd owe me." He smiled. "Technically, they'd owe whoever holds the note. It wasn't about the money. It was about balance." Every weekend after that, I volunteered to help with their paperwork, insurance renewals, mail sorting, anything that gave me a look at their finances. They thought I was being dutiful. They even bragged to friends that I was learning responsibility. Meanwhile, I was quietly collecting data, account numbers, payment dates, loan terms. I kept everything in a folder labeled recipes. There was something thrilling about it in a sad way. Each piece of paper was a brick in a wall they'd built to keep me out, and I was learning exactly where to pull it apart. Months passed. The tension in the house thickened. Richard became distant, colder, distracted. His mother called constantly checking on her investment. One night after she'd hung up, he said, "Mom's right, you know. You should have been more grateful. For what I asked. For everything she's done for us." "You mean for you," I said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That was the moment I stopped trying to save us. From then on, every smile I gave him was calculated. Every kind gesture rehearsed. I knew he'd see only what he wanted: obedience. Meanwhile, I was building my exit. By late spring, I had arranged a meeting with a mortgage broker in town. We sat in a small office that smelled of old coffee and printer ink. "I'd like to purchase an existing loan," I said. He asked, "Do you have a property in mind?" "Yes," I said. "I already live in it." He blinked, then smiled the way professionals do when they realize they've just stepped into something interesting. Within weeks, the paperwork was in motion. I transferred the funds from an investment Tom helped me structure discreetly, technically legal, morally questionable. But so was everything they'd ever done to me. On June 10th, the loan officially changed hands. On paper, it looked like a routine transaction. In reality, the Whitmores had just become my tenants. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I'd sit at dinner listening to her complain about ungrateful women and think you have no idea who owns the chair you're sitting on. It was intoxicating, not because of revenge, but because of control. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was directing. Still, there were nights when guilt whispered. When I'd look at Richard sleeping beside me and remember the man I married, the one who once brought me coffee every morning. But then I'd remember the laughter, the humiliation, the way his hand stayed perfectly still when his mother called me a gold digger. That silence was the betrayal. The rest was just paperwork. By the end of the summer, I was ready. All I needed was the right moment, one she'd never forget. Her next birthday was in October. The invitations went out early, as always. I received mine with a note dressed nicely this time. I smiled when I read it. I already had my outfit planned and something far better than jewelry to bring. The thing about revenge is that it doesn't start with rage. It starts with quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you notice things like how the chair beside you at breakfast is always empty, or how your husband's laughter has a different rhythm when he's talking to his mother. After the night of that dinner, Richard and I were still technically married, but the truth is we'd already separated silently, without lawyers, without words. He lived in the same house, but we occupied different worlds. He started coming home later. When he did, he smelled of cologne. That wasn't his. He stopped asking about my day. I stopped volunteering answers. It was like living with a polite stranger. His mother called every evening. I could hear her voice through the closed door of his office, shrill, judgmental, possessive. He'd always say, "Yes, Mom, you're right," then hang up and pour himself another drink. Sometimes he'd glance at me like I was something he'd accidentally picked up and didn't know where to put down. So I made myself smaller, quieter, invisible, because invisible women get away with everything. One afternoon I went to see Tom again. His office was a small converted house near the lake, cluttered with old law books and a dying fern. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "So, you're still going through with it?" I nodded. "They think they're untouchable. I just want them to understand what it feels like not to be." Tom sighed. "This isn't about winning Claire. It's about walking away intact." I smiled faintly. "I'll walk, but not empty-handed." He handed me another set of documents. "If you're going to move forward, you'll need to transfer the ownership properly, through an intermediary. Keeps your name clean." He'd arranged everything a small LLC registered in Delaware standard shell structure. It would look like any investment company buying mortgage notes. No one would trace it back to me. I signed where he told me to sign. Each stroke of the pen felt like cutting a cord. At home, things got colder. Richard began sleeping in the guest room. When I asked why, he said, "You snore." I didn't. He started locking his phone, stopped wearing his ring. I didn't confront him. What was the point? He'd already made his choice. But one evening I saw something I hadn't expected, an email open on his laptop. It was from his mother. "Once the divorce is final, we'll transfer the assets back under the family trust. She won't get a dime." He'd replied, "Understood." No emotion, no hesitation, just compliance. I closed the laptop quietly and went to bed. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered, "You should have left me with nothing sooner. You would have saved yourself so much." The next morning I withdrew everything I had from our joint account, the small balance he hadn't already drained. I opened a new one in my maiden name under a different bank. That same week I found a small apartment downtown. I told him I needed space. He said, "Good. Maybe it'll help you realize what you're throwing away." I packed my clothes, my books, and one photograph, our wedding picture. I didn't take it because I missed him. I took it because it reminded me of who he used to be and how much he'd changed. When I left the house, I didn't tell him I still owned it. On paper, at least. The apartment was small but clean, with a window overlooking the city lights. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I spent hours walking along the river, thinking about how much time I'd wasted trying to belong to a family that never wanted me. I got a part-time tutoring job again. Kids' essays, the smell of old library books, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But I wasn't done. Tom called a few weeks later. "Claire, the transfer's complete. You're officially the note holder on the Whitmore property." I felt my heart slow down and speed up at the same time. "So, technically they pay me now." He chuckled. "Technically, yes. Though they'll never know." For months I said nothing. I just watched. The payments came in like clockwork, each one a silent reminder of who held the power now. Then one night Richard called. "I need you to sign something," he said flatly. "A financial document. It's just a formality." I met him at a cafe downtown. He looked tired, thinner, paler, but still arrogant. He slid a folder across the table. "Mom's updating her estate plan," he said. "She wants everything clean before the trust transfers." I opened the folder. It was a quitclaim deed, one that would remove any hypothetical spousal rights I might have to the house. He smiled. "It's just paperwork." I looked him in the eye. "You're right, it's just paperwork," and I signed it. He left smug, thinking he'd won. When the door closed behind him, I laughed for the first time in months. Not a loud laugh, a small, bitter one that tasted like freedom. Because what he didn't know was that I didn't need spousal rights. I owned the damn house already. That night, I opened a bottle of red wine and sat by the window of my apartment staring at the skyline. Somewhere in that sea of lights was the home they still thought belonged to them. I whispered, "Enjoy it while you can." Weeks later, I got an email from the property management firm handling the payments. The Whitmores had fallen behind 2 months late, default territory. I didn't react, I just sent a single reply. Proceed according to contract. The notice of default was mailed the next morning. I imagined her face when she opened it, the disbelief, the panic. She'd probably call Richard first. He'd probably call the bank. And they'd both learn the same thing: the bank didn't own their mortgage anymore. Someone else did. Someone they'd laughed at. Someone who never forgot. The next time I saw Richard was in the courthouse parking lot. He was there for something unrelated, a client meeting, I think. He didn't notice me at first, but when he did, he froze. "Claire," he said, "you look different." "I am," I said simply. He smiled awkwardly. "You still angry?" "No," I said. "I'm patient." He didn't understand. He wouldn't until October, because that was when his mother would find out that the house she used to own, the one she bragged about for years, was already sold, and the buyer had been sitting at her dinner table the whole time. When the letter came, I knew before opening it what it was: a divorce petition, no phone call, no conversation, no closure, just a plain envelope on my doorstep left like junk mail. I stood there in my hallway, holding it between my fingers, tracing the embossed letterhead Whitmore and Associates. Of course he'd use the family firm. Inside, the language was sterile, almost bureaucratic. Irreconcilable differences. Petitioner requests no spousal support. Cold words for a cold marriage. I didn't cry. I just sat on the couch and reread it like a business proposal. It didn't even feel personal anymore. It was a transaction, just another thing Richard was trying to control. By then, we hadn't spoken in weeks. He was living with his mother again, or so I heard. The house, my house, was still under their roof, but in my name. They didn't know it yet. That secret sat between us, like a loaded weapon neither of them saw. 2 days later, Tom called, so he said. The papers came. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. They did. He sighed. You going to fight it? No, I said. I'm going to sign it, Claire. You don't have to, I know. I looked out the window at the city below. But if I fight, I lose my calm. And I need my calm right now. He didn't argue. Tom had seen enough divorces to understand sometimes the best counterattack is stillness. When Richard got my signed papers, he called me for the first time in months. You made this easy, he said. You made it inevitable, I replied. He hesitated. You'll regret this, you know. You walked away from everything. I smiled into the silence. You keep thinking that. He hung up first. That was the last time we spoke as husband and wife. The next few weeks were strangely peaceful. I threw myself into work, tutoring, managing small investments, making dinner for one. I liked the sound of a quiet kitchen. No clinking glasses, no sarcastic laughter. Just my breathing and sometimes jazz. But beneath that calm was something alive, electric. Because while they were planning to cut me off, I was finalizing paperwork that would make it impossible. Tom had found a clause in the original property note that allowed for foreclosure after 90 days of non-payment. Technically, he said you could reclaim the property entirely. You'd own it free and clear. Technically, I repeated, smiling. By mid-August, the Whitmores were 3 months late. The official notice was sent, and then panic. First, I got a voicemail from Richard. Claire, this has to be some mistake. Mom says we got a foreclosure notice. Then another from her, you witch. You think you can take what's ours? Ours. That word again. I didn't call back. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. But I wasn't cruel, not yet. I gave them time. 30 days. I even paused the legal process just to watch them squirm. Then one morning my lawyer sent me a message they've transferred the remaining balance. I smiled. Of course they have. The payment was wired to my account under the LLC's name. The debt was cleared, the house still theirs, but only for a little while longer. Because that transaction gave me full visibility into their finances. And that was when I discovered something even better: they were broke. Richard had made a series of bad investments, crypto startups, luxury condos, vanity projects. He'd used family funds, assuming his mother's influence would always shield him, but she'd been moving money to draining accounts to sustain her social image. The Whitmores were rich on paper, poor in reality. Their empire was collapsing in silence the way wealth often does not, with an explosion, but a slow, quiet rot. I didn't have to destroy them. They'd done it themselves. All I did was hold up the mirror. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. One afternoon, I got a letter from their attorney, not about the house, not about money. It was an invitation. To her birthday. At first, I thought it was a joke. But it was real. A formal dinner, same address, same guest list, same woman who'd once called me a gold digger in front of 20 people. There was a handwritten note inside: "Let's put the past behind us. Family is family." I almost laughed. The arrogance, the denial, the desperation. I poured myself a glass of wine and called Tom. "She invited me," I said. He chuckled. "You going?" "Oh, I'm going," I said. "But this time I'm bringing dessert." For weeks I planned every detail. I didn't need theatrics, I wanted simplicity. A manila envelope, crisp and clean. Inside, the transfer deed. The official one, stamped, notarized, and filed. By law, after they defaulted, the property could be transferred back to the lender, which was me. I didn't have to sue, argue, or even knock on their door. The system that had once excluded me now worked in my favor. I was the bank. The day before the party, I drove past the house. The garden was dying, the porch light flickered. It looked smaller somehow, not just in size, but in spirit. I parked across the street, rolled down the window, and just watched. Through the curtain, I saw her, my mother-in-law, pacing with her phone, her voice sharp and frantic. Richard stood by the window, shoulders slumped, holding a drink. They looked trapped inside their own fortress. And maybe they were. That night, I wrote a note and slipped it into the envelope. Just one line: debt repaid. It wasn't cruel. It was closure. The next evening, I wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated. The same necklace she once mocked me for wearing because it looked cheap. I parked at the curb, walked up the path, and handed the envelope to the doorman. "For Mrs. Whitmore," I said. Inside, the music was soft jazz, the same fake laughter as always. I didn't step in right away. I just waited, listening. Then I heard her voice, loud, confident, brittle, and I thought one last toast, then silence. The envelope would reach her soon. She'd open it at the table, and the room would go quiet. For the first time, not because of her words, but because of mine. The next morning began with the kind of silence that hums, that heavy, expectant quiet you hear before a thunderstorm. I woke early, long before sunrise, and sat by my kitchen window with a cup of black coffee, staring at the city slowly waking up. Somewhere across town, she was probably doing the same, except instead of calm, she'd be clutching that envelope, rereading it over and over, trying to make sense of how everything she thought she owned had slipped through her fingers. I didn't feel triumphant, just finished. When I first started this, I told myself it was about justice, about balance. But the truth is, revenge never feels clean. It leaves residue, a film of old emotion you can't quite wash off. Tom called later that morning. "She got it?" he asked. "She got it," I said quietly. "How'd she take it?" I smiled. Like a woman who just realized she's been living rent-free in someone else's house. He chuckled, then grew serious. "Claire, be careful. You've won. Don't let them drag you back in." "I won't," I said. But even as I said it, I knew the story wasn't over yet. That afternoon, I got a voicemail from Richard. His voice was low-controlled, too controlled. "Claire, we need to talk. Mom's not well. She's saying crazy things. Just call me." I didn't. 2 hours later, another message. This isn't funny, Claire. You can't do this. You don't understand what you've done. But I did understand. Perfectly. For years, they'd treated me like I was disposable and accessory that came with Richard's success. They never realized I was paying attention. They never imagined I'd learn the rules of their world and use them better than they ever could. Now their empire was cracking not because I'd attacked it, but because I'd simply taken back what they built on lies. 2 days passed before the inevitable visit. It was Saturday morning. I heard the knock before I even reached the door, sharp, impatient, entitled. Only one person knocked like that. When I opened it, she was standing there, pearls lipstick, the same designer coat she'd worn the night she called me a gold digger. Only now her face was pale, her eyes wild. How could you? She hissed. Good morning, I said. Would you like to come in? She pushed past me without waiting for an answer, the scent of expensive perfume and fury filling the room. You think this is a game? You humiliated me in front of everyone. I leaned against the counter. No, Mrs. Whitmore, I told the truth. She slammed her purse on the table. That house was our legacy. Your son sold it, I said simply. I just bought it. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You little, she started, then stopped. Her voice cracked. You ruined my family. I shook my head. No, you did that years ago. You just didn't notice. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, not angry anymore, just tired. Finally, she whispered, You don't understand what it's like to lose everything. I met her eyes. You're wrong. I do. You just never cared when it happened to me. She turned and walked out without another word. Her heels echoed down the hallway like gunshots. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her face, the disbelief, the fear, the pride collapsing under the weight of reality. It wasn't joy I felt. It was something colder. Guilt tries to creep in at times like that. But guilt is just a ghost that feeds on old love. I didn't feed it. Weeks passed. Life resumed its quiet rhythm. I met with Tom once a week to finalize the sale documents. The transfer had gone through cleanly. There were no loopholes left. The Whitmore's ownership was officially erased. You could rent it out, Tom said one day. Make a fortune off the name alone. I smiled faintly. Maybe later. But deep down, I already knew what I wanted. On a gray September morning, I drove out to my house. The lawn was overgrown. The mailbox still had their name on it in gold letters, the Whitmores. I parked by the curb and just sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Every memory, every insult, every fake smile, every hollow welcome to the family came flooding back. Then I stepped out. The air smelled like rain. I walked up the path slowly, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The door opened easily. They hadn't changed the locks. They never thought they'd need to. The inside looked smaller than I remembered. Cold. Staged. In the dining room, the same chandelier hung above the long mahogany table. I ran my fingers across it, feeling the grooves of the wood. I remembered sitting there smiling through humiliation. I remembered her voice sharp and gleeful. We don't marry gold diggers. And I remembered what came after. I walked to the head of the table, her seat, and sat down. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the silence fill the room. This, I whispered to the empty air, is what ownership sounds like. I didn't stay long. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to end it. Before leaving, I pulled out a set of keys and placed them on the table, not mine, but theirs. The ones they used to hold on to like trophies. Then on a sheet of paper, I wrote 2 words in black ink, debt cleared. I left it there under the chandelier where the light caught it perfectly. As I locked the door behind me, I realized the house no longer haunted me. It was just a structure, now brick glass memory. The ghosts stayed behind. That evening, Tom called again. You did it, he said softly. I did, I replied. How do you feel lighter? I said. And strangely, done. He paused. You know you could walk away now, start over. I looked out at the city lights and nodded. I already have. But there's one last thing I need to do. What's that? He asked. I smiled faintly. Give her a birthday present. The invitation had arrived a week earlier, another one of her carefully staged affairs. She must have thought pretending everything was fine would make it so. This time, I wasn't attending as her daughter-in-law, I was attending as her landlord, and inside the envelope I planned to bring was the simplest, most devastating gift of all the final transfer document, filed and recorded, bearing my name alone. The house she once ruled over wasn't hers anymore, it was mine. All I had to do now was hand her the proof and smile. The night of her birthday came wrapped in silk and pretense. Same house, same guest list, same brittle laughter echoing through the marble halls. I parked across the street for a moment, watching the windows glow gold from the chandeliers. My fingers rested on the envelope sitting on the passenger seat, the one that carried a new deed legally filed irrevocable. I could have mailed it. I could have let a lawyer deliver it. But some things need to be witnessed. I took a breath, smoothed my black dress, and stepped out into the night. When I walked through the front doors, the doorman's face flickered with confusion. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, hesitating. I smiled faintly. Not anymore. Inside, the air smelled like perfume and expensive regret. People milled around with champagne flutes, pretending not to gossip. Her circle hadn't changed women with manicured perfection, and men who looked permanently exhausted from maintaining illusions. Then I saw her, my mother-in-law, standing at the center of it all, as if the room was her stage. A tight smile, a glittering dress pearls that didn't shine as bright as they used to. When her eyes met mine, the smile froze. "Claire," she said finally, voice sweet as lemon acid. "How unexpected." "Happy birthday," I replied calmly. Gasps rippled quietly through the room like someone had opened a window in a storm. She blinked, recalibrating. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "I suppose we should be gracious. Even the ex-wife deserves a drink." I smiled. I brought something better. The music softened as I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope. I didn't hand it to her yet, I just held it lightly like a promise. "Do you remember I said last year's dinner?" The guests shifted uneasy. A few exchanged looks. They remembered. Her expression hardened. That was a misunderstanding. "No," I said softly. "It was a definition." She tried to laugh, but her voice trembled. "Claire, I really don't think this is the time." "It's the perfect time," I interrupted gently. Every word I spoke felt like glass, clear, sharp, deliberate. "You said I'd never be part of this family," I continued, "that you don't marry gold diggers." The room went still. Even the jazz band stopped playing. I smiled and held out the envelope. "You were right. I didn't marry into this family. I bought it." She hesitated, then snatched the envelope like she was reclaiming control. "What is this?" "The deed," I said. "To this house." Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. The paper unfolded with a crackle that seemed to echo louder than any voice in the room. You could see the color drain from her face as she read the legal language the stamp my name printed in bold letters. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Someone in the back gasped. Richard. I hadn't seen him till that moment. He stood by the staircase, pale and rigid like he'd seen a ghost. He stepped forward. "What the hell is this?" I looked at him. The man I once loved, the man who stood by while I was humiliated. "It's ownership," I said. "Something your family never thought I'd understand." He turned to his mother. "You sold it." She tricked us," she stammered. "This can't be legal." I tilted my head. "It's very legal. You can ask your firm." They drew the papers. A ripple of whispers filled the room, the kind that spreads when the truth finally hits oxygen. She dropped the envelope. It fluttered to the floor like the last leaf of autumn. Her hands shook. You planned this." I nodded once, every step. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the waitstaff stood frozen at the edges of the room. I could feel the weight of every gaze, pity, shock, admiration. It didn't matter. For 7 years, I'd been invisible. Tonight, every eye in that house saw me. I took a small sip of champagne from a passing tray. "You know, I said lightly, it's funny. You always told me to learn how to handle property." I finally did. That broke the silence. A few people actually laughed, not cruelly, but the way people laugh when they realize a storm has passed and left the world rearranged. I placed the glass down, gently turned toward the door, and said, "You should get some rest, Mrs. Whitmore. Moving can be exhausting." Then I walked out. Outside, the air was crisp and clear the way it gets after a heavy storm. I paused at the end of the walkway and looked back. Through the window, I could still see her standing there, rigid, small, almost fragile. Richard was at her side, trying to calm her, but his eyes kept darting to the papers on the floor. I didn't feel joy, just release, the kind of peace that comes when a long war finally ends. As I reached my car, Tom called. I answered on speaker. "It's done," I said. I heard he replied. "Half the city probably did." "I didn't mean to make it public," I said. He chuckled. "Sure you didn't." I smiled faintly. She called me a gold digger in front of everyone. It seemed fair to correct the record. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine." Then I looked up at the house one last time. The lights inside were dimming one by one. "You know what the best part is, Tom," I said. "What I never even raised my voice." That night I drove aimlessly for a while. Past the quiet neighborhoods, past the glowing gas stations, past all the places that used to remind me of the life I'd lost. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned off every light, and stood by the window looking out at the city. Down below, people were living their own small dramas, heartbreaks, betrayals, beginnings. I wondered how many of them were sitting in silence, plotting their own quiet revolutions. I thought about the woman I used to be, polite, eager to please, desperate to belong. And I realized I didn't need anyone's family anymore. I had built my own kind of legacy, the kind that couldn't be taken, mocked, or rewritten. Revenge, I realized, isn't about destruction. It's about reclamation. And that night, I reclaimed everything, my dignity, my silence, and the house she used to laugh from. Somewhere deep in that mansion, she was probably still holding that deed, still asking herself how it had happened. Maybe one day she'd understand that she didn't lose to me. She lost to the version of me she created. The morning after the party, the world looked different. Not brighter, just quieter. I woke up to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the smell of coffee, brewing, the kind of peace that doesn't ask for permission. My phone was full of missed calls, most of them from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer any of them. The city outside felt indifferent. Cars moved. Birds argued on telephone wires. Life kept going, unaware that somewhere in the high part of town, a dynasty had quietly collapsed overnight. Tom called around 10. "You made the front page," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He chuckled. "Social page." Someone recorded the moment. The envelope, her face, it's all over local media. The Whitmore gala scandal. "You've gone viral without trying." I laughed softly, disbelievingly. Of course I did. Then silence. "Are you angry?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm tired. But it's a good kind of tired." By noon I had emails from journalists, invitations to exclusive interviews, even a podcast request titled "The House She Bought Back." I ignored them all. Some stories aren't meant to be told on microphones. They're meant to stay exactly where they happened, between the walls that once held your humiliation. Instead, I went out for groceries. Just me, a shopping cart, and sunlight. No makeup, no armor. At the checkout, a woman around my age smiled at me. "I saw you online," she said quietly. "Good for you." I smiled back. "Thank you." It was the first time someone had said those words without pity. The next few weeks unfolded in odd contrast, half freedom, half shadow. Freedom because I no longer had to answer to anyone. I didn't owe explanations. I didn't owe grace. Shadow because part of me still replayed that night, her stunned face, the whispers, Richard's silence. Some nights I wondered if he hated me or finally understood me. A week later I got my answer. He showed up at my apartment. No warning. Just a knock softer this time. I opened the door. He looked worn out. The sharpness in his eyes was gone. What remained was something smaller, humbled. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. He walked in like a stranger in his own life, glancing around at the tidy one-bedroom space. No pretense here, no grand foyer, no chandeliers, no servants pretending not to listen. Just quiet. You destroyed her, he said finally. No, I said. She destroyed herself. I just let her see it. He nodded slowly, then looked at me with something that wasn't anger. Maybe regret. Maybe confusion. She hasn't left the house since that night, he said. She barely speaks. Keeps saying she hears your voice every time she walks through the hallway. I didn't reply. He stepped closer. Why'd you do it, Claire, really? I met his eyes. Because you all thought I wouldn't. He exhaled, hands in his pockets. You could have just left. I did, I said. You just didn't notice until I took the house. That made him flinch. He turned away, rubbed his face. You got what you wanted. She's broken. You win. I shook my head. This was never about winning. It was about ending. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then before leaving, he looked back and said quietly, You were always stronger than any of us realized. When the door closed, I sat down and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It didn't feel like victory, more like survival. A few weeks later, Tom called again. She's transferring the rest of her assets, he said. Liquidating. To cover debts, I asked. Probably. Maybe to leave the city. Who knows? I nodded slowly. Let her. What about the house? I hesitated. Keep it under the company. For now. You don't want to sell? No, I said softly. Not yet. It's not about money. It's about memory. He understood. You're allowed to let it go when you're ready. That night, I drove to the house again. I parked outside and watched it from across the street. The windows were dark. No parties, no laughter, just a dim porch light flickering the way it always did. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of it. I just felt distance, the good kind. I walked up the driveway, slipped a small note under the door, and left without knocking. It said, I forgive you, because I did. Not for her sake, but for mine. Months passed. I rebuilt quietly, moved to a smaller town by the coast, started teaching again, online classes, this time literature and writing. My students didn't know who I was. They just knew Mrs. C, the calm teacher who told them that stories could save your sanity if you learned to tell them right. Sometimes in the middle of class, I'd look at their faces and think if only they knew. Tom came to visit once. We walked along the boardwalk sipping coffee. You ever think about going back, he asked, to the house, to that life? I smiled faintly. No, that version of me died the night they laughed. He nodded. So what now? Now I said I live. We walked in silence for a while, the sea wind carrying away everything that didn't matter anymore. Months later, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Claire. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say this before it's too late. You were right. I treated you like you were small because I thought it made me bigger. I was wrong. The house is empty now. Maybe it always was. Evelyn Whitmore. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. It didn't make me cry. It didn't heal anything, but it softened the edges. Maybe that was enough. Sometimes at night I still dream of that dining room, the laughter, the crystal clinking, the exact moment silence fell. But in the dream I'm not angry anymore. I'm just watching. And in those moments I understand something I didn't before. Revenge isn't loud and it isn't cruel. It's balance when life finally weighs itself correctly. And in that balance, I found peace. Part 7. Aftermath 1. 181 words. It's been a year since that night. A year since the envelope hit the table and the room went silent. Life feels lighter now. Not happier exactly. Happiness was never the goal. Just honest, clean. I still wake early, still make coffee the same way, still listen to the radio as the morning light creeps across the floor. But the difference is in the quiet. It no longer feels heavy. It's peaceful. I live by the coast now. Small town, modest apartment. The ocean is 2 blocks away. I can hear the waves when the wind's right. People here don't know the name Whitmore, and I don't offer it. They call me Ms. C, the quiet woman who teaches writing classes at the community center and always tips too much at the cafe. I like that. Being anonymous feels like grace. Every few weeks, Tom calls, usually just to check in. "How's life by the ocean?" he asks. "Peaceful," I say. "Predictable. No lawyers, no marble floors, no whispered insults." He laughs. "Sounds perfect." "It's close," I tell him. "Perfect's overrated anyway." Sometimes he pauses before hanging up, like there's something he wants to say but doesn't. Tom's that kind of man, careful with his words, respectful of silence. I think he knows I still carry ghosts, even if I don't name them. One afternoon in early spring, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Handwritten, old-fashioned, no return address, just my name. The handwriting stopped me cold. I knew it instantly. It was hers. For a long time, I just stood there by the mailbox, letter in hand, the ocean wind tangling my hair. Part of me wanted to throw it away, but curiosity, or maybe mercy, made me open it. The paper was thin, almost translucent, the ink uneven, the handwriting shaky. "Claire, I don't know if you'll read this. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I need to say this while I still can." After that night, everything changed. The house is empty now. I sit in those rooms and hear the silence, and for the first time, I understand what it feels like to be on the outside. I used to think wealth could shield us from consequence. I was wrong. You were never small, Claire. I was. I just didn't see it then. If you ever pass by this house again, know that it's yours in more ways than paper can define. You earned it not by buying it, but by surviving us. Evelyn Whitmore. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I folded it, carefully laid it on the table, and sat there in silence. Not crying, not angry, just still. For the first time, I saw her not as the enemy, but as a woman built by fear, fear of losing control, fear of becoming irrelevant, fear of watching her son love someone she couldn't control, and in that understanding, something loosened. A week later, I drove back to the city. Not to confront anyone, not to reclaim anything, just to see it all one last time. The house was different. The gardens overgrown, the shutters peeling. No cars in the driveway. A for sale sign stood crooked on the lawn, weather-beaten and tired. I parked at the curb and sat there for a long time. Then I got out. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. The air smelled faintly of dust and roses, the scent of something once proud that didn't know it had faded. Inside, the silence felt familiar, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was the silence of a place that finally understood it had said enough. I walked through each room, the grand foyer, the staircase, the dining room. My footsteps echoed. The chandelier above still hung there, crystal-dusted with cobwebs. I stopped at the table, the same table where she'd once called me a gold digger, the same table where I'd placed that envelope. For a moment, I let my hand rest on the polished surface. It was cold, lifeless. Then I whispered, "It's over." Not to her, not even to Richard, to myself. As I turned to leave, I saw a small framed photograph sitting on the mantel, one I hadn't noticed before. It was me and Richard from our wedding day. I looked younger, hopeful, unaware of how heavy love could become when built on uneven ground. I didn't take it. I just smiled faintly and left it there. When I stepped outside, the afternoon sun was soft and forgiving. I locked the door behind me and slid the key into the mailbox, a gesture, nothing more. The house wasn't mine anymore, not legally, not emotionally. It belonged to memory now. That night, back at my apartment by the sea, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter of my own. Evelyn, I got your note. Thank you. I hope you find peace wherever you are. The house doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what we both learned. Power built on cruelty always collapses. But sometimes, even from the ruins, something human can grow. Claire. I didn't mail it. Some things are better left unsent. I folded it, placed it next to her letter, and closed the drawer. 2 stories, finally put to rest. Now, when I teach my students about writing, I tell them that stories aren't just about endings. They're about reclamation, about finding your voice after someone's tried to take it. Sometimes they ask me, "Do you believe in forgiveness?" I tell them the truth. Yes. But it's not for them, it's for you. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means not carrying the fire anymore. And I don't. Every evening I walk to the beach. The waves crash, the horizon bleeds gold, and I watch the sun sink into the water. Sometimes I think about the people still trapped in their own gilded cages, smiling, performing, pretending. And I hope one day they realize what I did. Silence can be power. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of clarity. That's where I live now, in clarity. If you're listening to this, if you've ever been laughed at, underestimated, made to feel small, know this. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You don't have to fight loud to win. You just have to learn when to walk away and when to smile while doing it. Because sometimes the softest voice in the room is the one that ends the war. And if my story taught me anything, it's this: revenge isn't about ruining someone else's life. It's about rebuilding yours quietly, beautifully, on your own terms. This was mine. Thank you for listening. If my story meant something to you, share it or tell your own. We all have one.